So, okay. Peace, greetings, everyone. Salaam alaikum. My name is Annie Zonneveld. I'm the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. As part of our scholar series that we are just embarking on, these series are going to be accompanying the Progressive Islam curriculum that we've been developing. And in this particular episode, it is the first unit, which is called What is Islam? And to help delve into the philosophy of what is Islam, particularly from a progressive interpretation, I'm very happy to have Dr. John Andrew Morrow join us. He is a professor, scholar of Islam, and an author as well. And I am particularly smitten by Dr. Morrow because of his writings on the covenant between Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with various tribes, religious tribes, Jews as well as Christians, and how we as at Muslims for Progressive Values have utilized that in our advocacy for the rights of religious minorities in Muslim majority countries. So thank you, John, for giving us the time and sharing your wisdom with us today. The talking points that we wanted to cover in regards to the big picture of what is Islam, I'll just leave it at open up this conversation with that, if you share your thinking about what makes you a Muslim, what is Islam, and how do we define ourselves as Muslims here in the American context, in the Western world in particular.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to skim through this unit 1 with you, and then we can use that as a starting point to discuss. So I'm going to just share my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah. You should have, yeah.
Okay. So you can see this unit 1 here?
No. It's just starting. There we go. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to go through this from the point of view of historical critical scholarship. And we can discuss some of these things. Progressive Islam. I certainly agree. We certainly don't want any regressive Islam. Yes, we have too much regressive Islam, fundamentalist, literalist, extremist, and so on. So I'm all for progressive Islam. Islam belongs to the age. Like everything, it needs to evolve and it needs to grow as we grow, as our understanding grows, and so on. The first lesson here deals with pre-Islamic Arabia. All right. It starts by saying today Arabia before Islam is referred to as the age of Jahiliyyah. Okay. All right. But aside from scholars and historians of Islam, few know what life was like in Arabia prior to the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and the rise of Islam across the region. This part here at the end, absolutely. Few know what life was like. Our understanding of that pre-Islamic period is very limited, and we continue to learn more and more about it. So our knowledge of the Jahiliyyah is informed by books that were written mostly the earliest 150 years after the fact. Most of them are at least 300 years after the fact, written by people who are not from the region, who are living in, the big cities and capitals and so on, and Baghdad. And so they were trying to reconstruct what that period was like. All right. So
let me ask you something.
Yes.
The Bedouins, they have more of an oral tradition, correct? And
well, see, that's one of the things. That's one of the things. I mean, we were taught that they were illiterate and taught predominantly or entirely, that there was no writing, that the first book ever written was the Quran, and that's when the Arabic alphabet spread throughout Arabia and beyond. But as a result of research in the field, and new developments, we have come to revise those conclusions. Um, so yes, in
Yeah,
terms,
because I think
yes.
that
Mhm.
the way the Bedouins lived, I think it will really inform us a lot about the context in which the Quran was revealed and
Mm,
Prophet Muhammad's life and his lifestyle at that particular time.
sure. Now, I'm going to go through this, and whatever is fantastic, I'm going to say it's fantastic and it's right on.
Okay,
And any criticism I offer is just constructive.
sure.
Um, and this also applies to my works. There are things that I wrote 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even like 2 years ago or a year ago that are now obsolete.
Mm.
New discoveries have been made. And, I mean, for example, in some of my previous books, I mentioned, and of course, this is based on the Islamic tradition, that virtually all the Arabs were illiterate, and there were only a handful of people in Mecca and Medina who could actually read and write. We know now that this is not the case,
Mm.
that literacy was widespread among the Arabs. Looks like even the average Bedouin, the average nomad, was able to read and write. And we have traces of this all over Arabia and the Levant, and everywhere the Arabs went, they left the writing. They left it in carvings on stone. And these writings were ignored for over 1,000 years,
Okay, so and why?
almost, yeah,
Why? What?
almost
Why?
1,400 years.
And why?
Um, well,
What does
that's
it serve?
okay.
Uh,
Yes. No, no, no. Yes, I know where you're going with this because at least in Saudi Arabia, um, archaeological digs were prohibited. Okay. Um, the previous leaders did not allow it. And so archaeologists and scholars in epigraphy and so on, they were not allowed to survey Arabia. The leadership clearly felt threatened. All right. So for them, it's not history. It's sacred history. It's written in stone. It can't be questioned. It can't be altered. And so they felt that excavations, archaeological work, surveys, and so on might undermine uh, the foundations of the faith. This was their fear. And the Saudis, I regret to say, have a long history of deliberately destroying Islamic heritage.
yeah.
The house of the Prophet, the house of Khadija, uh, of the companions of the Prophet, early structures, mosques built at the time of the Prophet, tombs. I mean, they bulldozed the cemetery of Baqi, they destroyed all the shrines and so on. So they have a long history of just devastating everything in terms of archaeology. And so, fortunately, now, the leadership is more open-minded, and they were doing it quietly before, but now they're coming out and they're publishing their findings and so on. There are teams of like French scholars and American scholars led by, Ahmed Al-Jalad from the Ohio State University. Um, Yes, so many people are on the ground and they're doing work. Unfortunately, they can't do any work around Mecca. And by the way, I mean, pretty much everything's been destroyed there anyhow. And they've
Yeah.
never let anyone go dig around in Medina or anything. But in other areas, they have given them permission, and the discoveries that they have made are frankly groundbreaking. And
Mm.
one of these is how common writing actually was. And we've learned a lot about the history of the Arabic script. It didn't spread with the rise of Islam. It had existed for centuries before that. And before that, they were using another script called Safavidic people thought these were foreign languages. They couldn't read the alphabet until Ahmed al-Jalad came around and actually broke the code, and he started reading all of these inscriptions. And the Arabs have been writing for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and even before that, there's like Southern Arabian languages and script and so on. So there is a long, long written history in stone about and so scholars like Ahmed al-Jalad have been focusing on pre-Islamic script, the Safavidic literature and so on stone, but also Paleo-Arabic, so the Arabic writing from the dawn of Islam. Other scholars have been, the French especially, have been surveying the Arabic script from the time of Islam, the early centuries of Islam, to see, does it confirm what we find in our books? Are there any divergences? Any things we need to rectify? So yes, it was not. So when we speak about Jahiliyyah, we're talking about a period that's it's literary. It's mostly legendary.
Mm.
It is not based in historical fact. So they were not ignorant, illiterate people. That's number one. Contrary to popular belief, both monotheism and polytheism were common across the Arab
Yeah.
Peninsula.
Yeah.
This is very good. Okay. Now, before, according to tradition, Islamic tradition, the Arabs were virtually all polytheists, and there were like islands of Jewish people. So in Medina, according to Islamic tradition, half the population consisted of pagan Arabs, and the other half consisted of Jewish monotheists. There is no mention at all of Christians in Mecca, Christians in Medina, or Christians anywhere in Arabia except, occasionally in the north. So another thing that we've revised is this, and you're halfway there, okay?
Okay.
That monotheism was common, absolutely.
Mm.
But as far as we know now, based on the evidence, polytheism was not common and had not been common for at least several hundred years. All right. And this is just mind-blowing. We were always told that they were pagans, they were burying their daughters alive, they were performing human sacrifices, they were involved in all kinds of debauchery and so on. That is not correct. We
Mm.
find, according to the epigraphic record, that the Arabs had largely abandoned polytheism several hundreds of years before the rise of Islam. So before that, and we know because we've surveyed all of the names of these divinities and gods that they were invoking. All right. The god that they were invoking overwhelmingly was Allat. All right.
Right.
Allat, which is the goddess. So they did pray to other gods, but overwhelmingly, most of the inscriptions and invocations are to Allat.
I'm smiling because it's funny that it's a female goddess.
Yes, yes. And that,
Yay!
okay, all right. Um, yes,
Oh,
Allat.
one
Yeah,
more thing, John, I wanted to
yeah,
say, if I
yeah,
may interrupt you for a minute. When you
please.
were talking about Medina, how it was predominantly there was the polytheist tribes, but there were the other half was Jewish.
Mhm.
And Prophet Muhammad, I read in a book that in this book, Prophet Muhammad, the World Changer, and
Yes,
in there, the author spoke about how Prophet Muhammad's mother was Jewish.
yes. And
How come we don't know that?
yes,
That
and
is not public knowledge.
yeah, I've written studies about that, and I'm going to get to that. But I think
Okay.
this is great, and I'm just expanding on things because,
Yes.
I'm an academic, I'm in the field, I'm following the scholarship and so on.
Yeah.
So there was a monotheistic revolution that took place among the Arabs several centuries before the rise of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. We're not sure about the nature of that revolution. Was it, were they Christianized to a certain degree? Um, did Christians, I mean, we do have accounts in early sources of Christians sending missionaries out of the Levant and so on, or like Greater Syria and those parts, that they had sent missionaries down into Arabia. Did they send, missionaries to different tribes? And did they bring them into monotheism? We don't know at this moment. We just know that they stopped invoking all of these gods and they started invoking Allah. And this was for hundreds of years before the rise of Islam. Everyone is praying to Allah. This is incredible.
Alat. Alat.
No, Allah. So
Allah.
there,
Oh, the God.
yes. So for several hundred years before Islam, all
Right.
these divinities and so on disappear, and they start praying to Allah.
Mhm.
Previously, they had been praying to Alat hundreds of years before, and Dusares, and many, many other divinities and deities. Okay, so they moved from worshiping the goddess and all the deities associated with her to worshiping Allah, which, at least in the mind of these people, was like the masculine, creator god and so on.
Yeah.
So, was it a result of the spread of Christianity? We don't know. But we also know that, at least from Islamic tradition, there were people in the early days, in the pre-Islamic period, known as the Hanifs. And you mentioned this here, who were monotheistic. They were apparently, they used to dress in wool, kind of like monks and everything. And they were calling people to the religion of Abraham. Okay. So there were precursors to the Prophet Muhammad. There were other people calling people to monotheism. All right. This doesn't minimize any of his accomplishments and everything, but clearly there was a transition from polytheism to monotheism. And you're right, there were Christians and there were Jewish people, and also there were Zoroastrians. Uh, it looks like the Christians were kind of like erased from the Islamic record, perhaps for ideological reasons. Um, uh, Christians were claiming that Muhammad was just borrowing things from the Bible, from the Torah, and from the gospel. And so, well, how do you address with that? You just say, well, there were no Christians there, right? Or, well, he was illiterate. And so he couldn't have read anything, so he couldn't have copied anything. And so instead of like really addressing these issues seriously, they just wanted to write him off, it seems. Everything here is good. How did Mecca become a thriving desert city? As far as we know, it wasn't, at least not during the pre-Islamic period. It may have become a thriving city after, but during that period, it was just, it was just there. It wasn't on a major trade route or anything. I think its importance heightened or increased enormously after the rise of Islam. But so far, there is nothing special about Mecca in the written record on stone. Um, all of this stuff associating Mecca to Abraham and so on, that's all from the Islamic tradition. So far, historians and archaeologists haven't been able to confirm any of this. So this is in the area of sacred history. Of course, it's difficult to confirm any of this because it took place so long ago. Um, yeah, so all of this stuff about the Kaaba is great. The clans of Quraysh, all these genealogies were developed hundreds and hundreds of years after. So they're suspect according to a lot of scholars. Gets into the life of the prophets. All of this is good. Yeah, this whole thing about the prophet's great grandmother. Yes. So let me see here what we have. Ah, yes. Okay. So, I published an article in the past called "The Prophet Muhammad and the Children of Israel" that deals with this issue. Um, and to the surprise of many of us, we learned that the Prophet's great-grandmother, Salma bint Amar, was Jewish. Okay. And like you said, well, why didn't we learn this? Well, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish sentiment, something like that. I mean, when I show this evidence to people, some people say, wow, other people get really upset. Okay, really upset.
Well,
But
I
again,
think Jews would get upset too because they want us as the enemies. I think it
because
goes
really,
both ways.
because absolutely, because the relationship has soured so much, and yeah. So, all right. Now, now again, and then of course you don't shoot the messenger, you don't get mad at me because I mention this. I am just citing Islamic sources. And so scholars like Suhaili, Al-Halabi, and others, they all mention the Prophet Muhammad's Jewish Banu Najjar roots.
Mhm.
Okay, so this was the tribe that um, uh, you know, uh, he was related to. And that's the other thing. That's the other thing. That so the Prophet Muhammad, of course, he was in Mecca, and his message was not, well received by a significant portion of the population. Of course, he sent people to Abyssinia and so on. And eventually, though, he went to Medina. And scholars and historians wonder, why did he go to Medina? And in the Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, the Christians of the world, I said that he was invited there
Yeah.
because there was a lot of conflict between the Jews and the Arabs there, and they thought that he could be a peacemaker. I think that's part of the puzzle, but there's another important part of the puzzle. He had family there. He was
Exactly.
he
So,
was related.
so all along, growing up, oh yeah, he was invited because he was the trusted one. So, okay, that's great. He's the trusted, but that something doesn't click
Exactly,
because
exactly.
because they didn't like his message, right? Because he was bringing a new religion. So why would they invite him? And so when I learned that he had Jewish heritage, I said, well, of course, then that totally made sense because they trusted him.
Yes, absolutely. Now, just imagine that, you live in Somalia, you live in Gaza, you live in Iraq or Iran, there's war, there's devastation, you need to flee as a refugee. Which country are you going to pick? Um, if you have relatives somewhere in the world, if you have relatives in Canada, if you have relatives, even, distant relatives, they don't, whatever, cousins, second cousins, any relatives, even you're going to go there. You'll go to Canada, you'll go to the UK because you have an uncle there, you have a nephew there. So yes, that is very key. And so,
Absolutely.
of course, we know he arrived there, and to every muhajir, he paired the muhajirin with the ansar. Okay, so you need to be hosts of these refugees. Okay, and so certain companions from Mecca were housed with certain companions from Medina. But did we ever ask ourselves who housed the Prophet Muhammad? Where did he stay? Well, check it out. He stayed with Abu Ayyub, his relative from the Banu Najjar. The Banu Najjar were Jewish. Hello. And then we can go back as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there's this whole thing about his mom Amina, okay, and his father Abdullah. And again, hold on a second here. You're telling us that these people were all polytheists and everything, and his dad's name, the slave and servant of Allah?
Yeah,
Really?
exactly.
Okay. And so in the Sunni sources, they say all these people were pagans and polytheistic and so on. The Shia Ahadith sources and books of biographies of the Prophet and so on always insisted that his father, his mom, and even his uncle were all monotheistic.
Right.
And that actually agrees with what we're discovering in terms of pre-Islamic history in Arabia, that monotheism was actually, so this seems to be a slander that was directed to the family of the Prophet. Um, Now, in some sources, so they were monotheistic. Were they just like pagan, heathen, Arab,
Or Hanifs, right?
monotheist?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Hanifs, as
Yeah.
that's what I believe,
Yeah.
or maybe influenced by Judaism. Some early Christian biographies of the Prophet Muhammad state that his mother was Jewish and his father was Christian. Hello. Now, is this just polemical?
Mm,
trying to say, well, that explains where he got these ideas.
right.
Or is there something behind that? But at least it confirms they were monotheistic. But here's the other thing that's kind of uh, another bomb I'm going to drop. Where was his mother buried? Amina. She was buried in the
Medina.
cemetery of the Banu Najjar.
Yeah.
They were Jews. It
Yeah.
was a Jewish cemetery.
Yeah.
Jews do not get buried in pagan and heathen cemeteries. They don't allow pagans or heathens to be buried in their cemeteries. So, well, that might tell you something that maybe it wasn't just his great grandmother, it could have been his mother. But if they weren't Jewish, they were of Jewish ancestry. Um, so these are things that are
John,
really, really fascinating.
I know it is. My jaw dropped when I learned that, and like a few months ago, and it was like, why don't we learn this? And with at the get go. Now, what happened to that cemetery? Do you know? Is it still in existence?
I doubt it because
They
yeah,
bulldoze everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
they destroy everything. They destroy everything. And if only we could dig respectfully, we will be able to confirm things from our sacred history. And we might have to tweak things, but nothing is going to destroy our belief in God. If these things, threaten someone's faith, you really don't have any faith.
Yeah.
So, all right,
The
let
other
me
thing
continue.
too,
Yeah,
one
go
point,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
think, the claim that his Prophet Muhammad's father was Christian, his mother was Jewish, and that's where he got these ideas from. But it also states in the Quran that, he didn't bring a new religion.
Exactly.
So
It's the same religion,
yeah,
right? It's
exactly.
monotheism.
Yeah,
And so why are you threatened because there are
exactly.
similarities between Islam and Christianity and Judaism and other monotheistic traditions? It's the same religion,
Yeah,
ultimately, in
it is.
essence.
Yeah.
Now, all right, this whole thing here, he went on caravan trips. Okay, so he was a merchant. This is good. So the early Islamic biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, some of them say that he was a merchant or he accompanied caravans and he went to Syria and he met Bahira the monk and all of this stuff. There are others that say, they don't want to deal with that. They say that he was actually a shepherd and he spent his youth in the hills with like goats and so on. Now, again, you have to look at the motivations of these biographers. Some people felt very threatened with the idea that he was traveling to Christendom and dealing with monks and dealing with priests. And Bahira had a scripture, and that scripture mentioned the prophet was coming. Some people felt very threatened by that. And so they said, no, 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 he was in Arabia, he was a shepherd, he was tending the sheep and the goats. Okay. So
Mhm.
again, some people say he was a shepherd, some people say he was a merchant. He was certainly a merchant, and we have this confirmed in Armenian sources and Syriac sources and so
Um,
on. So at sources 7th century, 8th century, and so on, people who actually interacted with him, met with him, and received covenants of protection. All of that is confirmed by sources that are much earlier than the Islamic ones. Then the whole Khadija thing. Okay, now Khadija, really, really an important woman, a powerful woman. Uh, Attempts were made to erase her from history. Muawiyah, in particular, he passed an edict prohibiting anyone from saying anything good about Khadija.
who
So
was
the
M- who was yeah,
Muawiyah,
who was that?
right? So the first Umayyad Caliph.
I see.
Yeah. So again, we see an attempt here to alter the history of the prophet's past and his family and his wife and so on. But Khadija, a historical figure for sure, a powerful woman, right? And so again, when they tell us that, oh, women were so oppressed and this and that in pre-Islamic Arabia, and Islam came, gave them all these rights, that's not exactly correct. Not at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
And we see that in Khadija, and she's not the only one. There were prominent women leaders in business and even in warfare and things of that nature during that pre-Islamic and early Islamic period. Now, this whole thing about her being 40 years of age, Actually, has become a dogma among certain Muslims, 40 years of age, 40 years of age, 40 years of age. And then she had a half dozen kids in the 7th century. I don't think so.
Mm,
Um, if you look at the biographies, there are many different ages. Some say that she was like, 28. Some say that she was like, in her 20s. There are many, many different. We've just been fed. See, when I teach Islam, they say, well, what's Islam's position on this? And I'll say, well, Islam has many positions on this. And I will give them all of the different opinions.
yeah,
Right? There's room for all of us in Islam. You
yeah,
don't have to, do takfir of everyone, throw everyone, everyone's an infidel unless they agree to, with your view. Uh, Muslims there's been like a narrowing, of the Muslim mind. We're trying to like reopen it, and show the full spectrum of opinion. But anyhow, so just on this issue of Khadija, some of them say she was, in her 20s. There are different According to some biographies, those weren't her kids. They were the kids of her sister. Her sister died and she adopted them or whatever.
mhm,
Um, According to some early biographies, she wasn't an old widow. She was a virgin.
mhm,
Okay, hello. So again, someone is trying to slander and undermine. Yeah, yeah, Muhammad, he married that old widow. Okay,
mm,
I don't know. So again, yes, that is one position. It's not the only position. There are, and these sources are just good as this source that says she's 40. There are other historians, early Islamic sources that say that she wasn't a widow, that she was young, she hadn't been married before. So it's important to consider these things. Um, the whole thing about the cave, a lot of people get this wrong. They think that he was awake when this happened. But according to the earliest biographies, this happened when he was sleeping. Okay,
mm,
so he had a vision in his sleep. So it's different than this idea if he's awake and an angel appears.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
Waraka, yes. All right. Now you mentioned here that he was a Hanif or an early Arab who practiced monotheism. Beautiful. Maybe he was a Hanif. The Hadith literature says that he had studied the Christian scriptures. So he could have been a Hanif, could have been a Christian as well. Some sources say he was a Christian. What denomination he was, who knows? But he's the one who yeah who yeah who identify that being, that spirit that appeared to him as Gabriel. He told him that namus that appeared to you can only be Jibrail and so on. So this whole his story here is very interesting. All of this other stuff is excellent. I love this thing about Sumaya, very inspiring character. And then you get to something that is indisputably historical, that is widely ignored by most Muslims. It's the Constitution of Medina, Sahifa al-Medina.
yeah,
All right, so the messenger of God, is invited, right, to Medina to be the leader, the peacemaker. Um, um, between the Arabs and the Jews, and there were only a few hundred Muslims at the beginning, but they kept growing and people started to convert and so on. So this document, there's wide consensus among scholars, historical critical scholars, that this document is authentic. We don't necessarily have the original.
mm,
It looks like the version that has survived is like a collage of like two different documents from two different periods based on textual criticism. But um, if you study the Hadith literature and you know Arabic, okay, it sounds very much like the Arabic that was spoken 300 years after the Prophet Muhammad.
mm,
Okay, it is in that language. Okay, but so you read the Hadith literature and everything and so on, and then you come across the Constitution of Medina. It is so archaic in its language and its structure that it strikes you. Whoa, what is this?
I see.
Okay. So yes.
So where can you find the Constitution of Medina?
Now the Constitution of Medina is found in Ibn Ishaq. So the earliest, by one of the earliest surviving extant biographies of the Prophet, it's found in Abu Ubaid, who had a book on like taxation, and Ibn Zanjawi. And then there's those are the earliest, and then there's it was copied from them by other scholars like Said and Nas and so on and other people. But um,
So there's no surviving copy of the different versions of it,
yeah,
physical.
no, we don't have a physical copy of it. I mean, yeah, no, we don't have a physical copy of that document, but we have early accounts of it in books of biography and in books of jurisprudence. Um, Now, this document is incredible, and I could just summarize some of the points here. It says, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. This is a document from Muhammad the Prophet, and I'm just summarizing. I'm not reading everything. It's between the believers and Muslims, and those who followed them, joined them, and worked with them. They are one community to the exclusion of others. Believers shall not leave anyone poor and helpless. Whoo! Okay, we are united. We're not going to abandon anyone. You've got social justice from the very beginning, and you deal
Exactly.
with this in Unit 1 about economic inequality, injustice, and so on. So from the very beginning. Now, this is in the okay. So he goes to Medina, and within 2 years, he establishes a constitution. Why after 2 years? Well, because there was a process of consensus building and consultation
That's
with
right.
the different tribal leaders and so on. This is not something that he just imposed upon the people.
Correct.
Remember, they yeah, see, people forget this, okay? That there was a yearly baya, or swearing of oath, or pledge of fealty or allegiance that was given to the Prophet Muhammad. He wasn't a dictator. Every year they would vote, are you satisfied with my leadership, and so on, and they would renew their oaths of allegiance with
So
him.
it's like
So,
an
yeah,
election.
absolutely. And so there was the Quran speaks about shura and consulting
Yes.
with people. So absolutely. Yeah, the God-fearing believers will oppose rebels and anyone who wants to spread injustice, sin, enmity, or corruption between believers. Whoo! We are at war against people who spread injustice, corruption. Okay? Um, the protection of God is one. Anyone can give protection to a stranger. Protection to
Yeah.
strangers?
Yeah.
Hello, in a tribal society,
Yep.
it's me, myself, and I. It's my
Yeah.
blood, it's my clan. But
Yeah.
they said, we're going to even protect the stranger in our midst. You come into our community, you are safe here.
Yeah.
Um, the believers are friends to one another. The Jews who follow us will get help and be treated equally. They will not be treated badly. Their enemies will not be helped. So, Jews, we've got your back,
Yeah.
and we are the enemies of your enemies. Okay?
Yeah.
Um, Believers who accept this constitution believe in God, cannot help an oppressor. Whoa. Um, yeah. And if the Jews are fighting alongside the believers, they need to help with the cost of war. And here's the key thing. The Jews are one community with the believers. The Jews have the religion and the Muslims have their own. This constitution refers to Jewish people as mu'mineen,
Yeah.
and as Muslims as mu'mineen. And in the covenants the Prophet made with the Christians, he described them as mu'mineen.
Yeah.
And so people like Fred Donner have argued that, in fact, what the Prophet Muhammad created was a confederation of believers, and
That's
that
right.
this was a believers movement. Yes, right? Muslims can't even agree with each other, and they bicker, and they accuse, they excommunicate one another. But wait a second. Here we have Muhammad and his followers saying that we may have differences with you Jewish people and you Christian people, but we all agree on the big picture. We're all monotheistic. We're all concerned about these same principles. Let's unite and let's spread this monotheistic movement,
Yeah.
right?
So
So,
that, yeah. So the thing is, I think there's this supremacy
yeah,
prism, right?
mhm,
In the sense that the capital M Muslim
right.
means that we only with the Muslim capital M are the believers and everybody else isn't, when that's not really the case at all.
You're absolutely correct, and this is confirmed in the epigraphic record. So we have the writings in stone, but also a close survey of the literary record as well. We find that the first several hundred years of Islam, Muslims referred to themselves as mu'mineen. It was only much later, around the period of Abdul Malik, when some of the leaders were becoming more intolerant. They wanted to, instead of building bridges, they wanted to build walls between
It's
communities.
politics. It's politics.
It is politics. It is absolutely politics. Maybe they felt threatened by the European Christians, and hence they wanted to differentiate, the Arab Christians from the Arab followers of Muhammad, and the
Mm,
Jews separate from them. But that initial period of coexistence broke down for political reasons, absolutely. And then Muslims, they started to identify themselves as Muslims, and Islam with a capital I, and it refers only to us and our religion and so on. So this whole section here on the Constitution of Medina is very important. Why is it that it was ignored? Well, quite simply for that, for political reasons.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Uh,
really appreciate you bringing this page to life because you
no, it's
definitely
beautiful.
added so much more
It,
to
it
it.
it's important now. The issue with this, what the person who brought this really to light was a scholar by the name of Muhammad Hamidullah. He was an Indian scholar. He lived in France too. He was an imam in Florida. He was an academic and an imam in a mosque. Very, very good scholar, open-minded and so on. He was like the first really to publish, to revive knowledge of the Constitution of Medina. Uh,
And when was that?
Oh, he lived in the 20th century. Yeah, Muhammad Hamidullah.
Yeah.
He published about the Constitution of Medina in French, also in English. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's called like the first constitution or whatever. But in fact, it is the first constitution historically,
Mhm.
before any other constitution. So historically, it's significant. And I've shared this with like experts in law and jurisprudence and judges, and they're just amazing that this document was produced in the 7th century. It was addressing rights that only really surfaced in the Western world with the Declaration of Human Rights,
Yeah.
and so on. So really light years ahead of his time.
Yeah.
The
Well,
Prophet
that's
Muhammad.
why,
Yeah.
that's why when I do my human rights work, particularly in Muslim majority countries, people push back, says, "Oh, Ani, you're just using a Western tool." And my argument
Mhm.
is that
Yeah.
no, it's not. It is inherently Islam. And then I bring up the Constitution of Medina, and Muslims are really ignorant about our own history.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I use this as the Constitution of Medina as part of our work, and it's a powerful tool
Right.
in our human rights work.
So some people think that, like we're like, well, there was a movement in the Muslim world called modernism.
Mhm.
And, it surfaced during a time where Muslims were colonized, and they had, very much an inferiority complex. And they wanted to prove to the Europeans and, that, well, Islam is compatible with Western values, and that, so they were starting from that point of view. Let's try to live up to this standard that these Europeans have and show. And there was the same thing with socialism. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
Islam is socialism and this and that and all of that nonsense. And some people will accuse us of doing the same thing, that we're operating from a Western point of view.
Yeah.
We're not. I'm not. And
I'm
I've
not
given
either.
lectures about this document, and I've compared it to other constitutions and everything, the Bill of Rights,
Yeah.
and all these documents that we have, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms from Canada. Um,
Yeah.
and I show how actually Western law borrowed a lot of these principles from like Islamic law and the Constitution of Medina and the covenants of the Prophet. So yeah, I've studied that in depth. I've published about it. So the Constitution of Medina, it was ignored by people who simply did not want to respect these laws.
Yeah.
It was revived by the Ottomans. So Ottoman domestic policy and foreign policy was based on the Constitution of Medina and the covenants of the Prophet. And so there was an Ottoman scribe by the name of Feridun Bey who published something called Manshuat as-Salatin, or the Encyclopedia of the Sultans. And this was really, um, you know, the basis, the motive, the basis for the Ottoman, state. And it starts with a couple of letters from the Prophet, the Constitution of Medina, as far as I recall, and the Ashtinameh, or the Covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks from Mount Sinai. And so they organized their empire into communities. It was called the millet system. And so the Muslims were a big segment. And then there were huge segments of Christian communities, and they operated as like autonomous or semi-autonomous communities. They lived according to their own religious laws and canon law. They had the right to collect taxes. And so, yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, like a, yeah. So anyhow, a very, very interesting system inspired by the Constitution of Medina, but largely forgotten. And as for these covenants of the Prophet, why is it that so many Muslims are unfamiliar with them? Well, because they were scattered throughout Islamic literature. You would so the letters, treaties, and covenants of the Prophet, you would find them in books of prophetic biography, in books of jurisprudence, and books of history and so on. They were scattered all over the place. They were only gathered together by Muhammad Hamidullah in Arabic in a big, huge volume called Al-Wathaiq. And
And when
he
was
tried.
that? And who was he, really briefly?
So Muhammad Hamidullah, who was an Indian scholar of Islam and also an academic, he gathered all of those letters and treaties of the Prophet from many, many, many different sources into one in Arabic. So scholars had access to it, but only, of course, if they read Arabic. And that was that. Then there was another scholar by the name of Ahmadi Mianji, who gathered all of those letters and more and provided commentaries upon them. Um, that multi-volume work is called Makatib al-Rasul, or the writings of the messenger. And then there was another scholar named Hassan Shirazi. He was another Shia scholar, and he compiled again other letters and treaties of the Prophet Muhammad. But it was only after in 2013, after I published the Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world, that finally most Muslims had access to these documents in the English language. And since then, these documents have been translated into dozens of languages. Yeah, dozens of languages, and they're accessible. The small version is available on the Internet Archive for free, all kinds of different languages. So yeah, knowledge of these documents is spreading. And so many Muslims, especially these Islamists are hilarious, you know. I mean,
Yes, I
I
know.
no, I mean, might as well laugh at them. I mean, they're so deplorable. But the thing is, we are fighting to create an Islamic state, an Islamic state, an Islamic state. Did you know we have a constitution? What?
That was inclusive.
That was inclusive? Right? And it said that these Jews that you hate so much are supposed to be our friends, and they're not kuffar. They're actually believers. And these Christians that you call mushrikeen or polytheists, actually, they're called believers because they're actually monotheistic. They're not polytheistic, okay?
Yeah.
Don't tell me that the Trinity is polytheism. So, again, I mean, if
Yeah.
these Islamists were fighting to for that, then maybe they imagine, they all turn and they decide to fight for pluralism and diversity and tolerance.
That will be the day.
Oh yeah, that'll be the day. Yeah, that'll be the day. So this is so important here. I'm so glad you included it. And then you have Islamic values. So some people approach Islam from just a fiqh point of view, like
Yeah.
rules based, like laws, 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 laws,
Yeah.
laws. Do you know how many laws there are in the Quran?
Very
Very
few.
few. And
Yes.
so that explains why 99% of Islamic laws in the Sharia do not come from the Quran.
Yeah.
And they don't even come from the Hadith. 99% of them were borrowed from Jewish law, Byzantine law, Zoroastrian law.
Yes.
So, see, people don't understand this. When the Muslims conquered, and it wasn't a violent conquest, when they took over the Byzantine Empire, because Byzantium had been at war with the Persians, and both of these superpowers had devastated each other, and the Muslims just showed up and they said, you know what, we had enough fighting. Okay, you want to rule, rule. Um, it wasn't scorched earth. It wasn't devastation. They kept the legal system basically intact. Unless there was something that completely contradicted, Quranic values, they kept all the laws intact. They kept all of the administration intact. All of the civil servants kept their jobs. The language of the Islamic Empire was Greek well into the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, who finally said we need to start using Arabic. Muslims, for most of this history, were a tiny minority ruling over a huge Christian majority. So they had to be tolerant,
Yeah.
right? Because they could have overthrown them quite easily just because of the sheer mass of Christians.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. So do you want to approach Islam from just like a legal point of view? Like Islam is like, and it's true. Like for these people, reviving Islam is like whipping people, stoning women to death, cutting off hands. That's Islam. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's totally ridiculous. But I approach Islam, well, obviously from a ruhani or spiritual point of view. That's how I started. That was my trajectory. Uh, I'm a spiritual person, and I was very impressed with the Quran and the spirituality and all of that stuff. So I'm not coming from like a legal perspective at all. So it's a spiritual, a ruhani perspective, and it's also akhlaqi, okay, ethical. I'm
Yeah.
interested in Islam spiritually. I'm interested in Islam from an ethical point of view.
I second
Um,
that.
yeah, the Prophet Muhammad, again, so they come with all these crazy hadith and all these crazy rules that are just like horrible, horrible, diabolical rules. And they are this is the sunnah of who? Shaitan? This is
Yeah.
not the sunnah of Rasulullah.
Yeah.
And why do I have this image of the Prophet? Well, it's based, I start from the Quran first and foremost, and I filter everything through it. And so, what does the Quran tell us about Muhammad? Peace and blessings be upon him. It says that he was a man of moral excellence. That's in two verses. Another one describes him as a mercy to the worlds. And another one describes him as kind and merciful. And
Yeah.
finally, there's another verse in the Quran referring to Muhammad that describes him as a lamp that dispels darkness. And so when I see something idiotic or an atrocity, I say, okay, or some crazy saying attributed to the prophet, I say, well, does this sound like it's coming from a person of moral excellence?
Yeah.
Thou shalt rape enslaved women.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Does this sound like, kill the kuffar? Does this come from the mercy to the worlds?
Yeah.
I don't think so. All these misogynistic ahadith that are
Yeah.
falsely attributed to him, is this a kind and merciful one? I mean, there are many, many ahadith that call upon men to beat their wayward wives. Um, Hello, does this sound like a person who is kind and merciful? It does not.
Yeah.
So clearly, that's my filter between
Right.
what is authentic and what is inauthentic. So lesson 3, Islamic values, love it. The 5 pillars, of course, this is very Sunni centric. They
Yeah.
mix
Yeah.
they mix beliefs with like practices. And
Yeah.
for like all the other Muslim sects, they separate beliefs, right, from like they have like usuluddin, the foundations of the faith, and furu'uddin, the branches of faith.
Yeah.
So for yeah. So yeah.
I would also say that there are so many other things in the Quran which should be as the five pillars of Islam.
Oh, absolutely,
Right, because
absolutely.
this is not something that is in a chapter in the Quran that says, "Oh, here's the five pillars of Islam." It was actually created after Prophet Muhammad died, right?
Of course, of course. No, absolutely. You're right. You're right. There is no such thing. There's no five pillars in the Quran, and there are no five pillars in the Hadith.
No.
When the Prophet, even in the Sunni Hadith, would speak about the pillars of Islam, sometimes, there would be nine of them, 10 of them, whatever. It just means like important things. So, for the Imamis, for the Shi'is, it's Tawheed, Adl, Nubuwa, Imama, and Qiyamah. Those are beliefs: divine unity, divine justice, prophecy, the imamates, and the day of judgment. And they organize the branches of religion as Salat, Saum, Hajj, Zakat, Khums, Jihad, Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahi anil Munkar, Tawalli, and Tabarri. So prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, Zakat and Khums, Jihad, sacred struggle. They include promoting the good and forbidding evil, loving the Prophet's family and separating from them. The Ismailis, they have similar things. And then you have the Ibadis as well. They organize things differently, but
The
it's important.
Ibanis?
The Ibadis,
Oh,
or
Ibadis.
yeah, the so-called Khawarij.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't like that term, and they disavow the Khawarij.
Yeah.
They're a very interesting sect. But yeah, anyhow, all of this, five pillars, great. Um, Protecting, life, absolutely. That is so fundamental in Islam. What is the fundamental right in Islam? The right to life.
Yeah.
And then you have these Islamists who disregard that completely.
Completely.
Yeah, yeah. La ikraha fi din.
Yeah.
So important, so important. Unfortunately, if you look at most exegetes of the Quran and most jurists, they argue that this was abrogated, right? By the sword verse, believe it or not. But of course, that's politically motivated,
Yeah.
right? You can't start because they became now Islam, as far as I'm concerned, during the time of the Prophet, was an egalitarian movement, and they were emancipating slaves. And then the caliphate collapses, and the caliphate turns into like a monarchy, into an empire. And then they want to start conquering the world. They want to conquer North Africa, Europe, Asia, and everything. They want to enslave people. They want to rob, they want booty. So this is pretty awkward,
Yeah.
right? There's no compulsion in religion, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they say that the jihad verses abrogate this.
Yeah.
And the jihadists to this day say that this is abrogated. But they're the same people who say that the Quran is eternal. So how could something eternal be abrogated if
That's right.
it's supposed to apply for eternity? I
Yeah.
mean, you can't reason with people who actually believe that reasoning is haram.
I know. I
They
know.
tell you logic is haram. How can you reason with someone like that?
Yeah.
Um,
I actually use the
yeah,
Surah 2, chapter 2, 256, the freedom of religion part, when I conduct interfaith marriages,
yeah.
as a way to validate. No, you have the right to. You're not compelled to convert into Islam to marry, because that's not freedom of religion.
Yeah, sacred inviolability of the human body. Karam al-insan, human dignity. Yes,
Mm.
human dignity, right?
It's a fundamental, yeah.
Absolutely. Rahma. Rahma. Uh, you know, Again, with the time I spent with the Islamists, and I'm still recovering from that, but that was long ago when I was a teenager. It was just all fire and brimstone and God the Avenger and kill the kuffar and all of that stuff. And yet, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, in the
I
name of Allah,
know.
most compassionate, most merciful, most compassionate, most merciful. It just didn't sink into these people. They believed that the only way they can go to heaven was martyrdom
Yeah.
because they were condemned to hell. And so they had lost all hope in the mercy of God. So, yes, this is so important. And I love that you point out that the root is the womb.
When
Okay.
I found that out about 25 years ago, I was just stunned, and it just brought tears to my eyes, because yes, it couldn't be. The womb is the most nurturing, the most protective, the most loving environment. I mean, it's just profound that that is the
Yes,
root
yes.
word of Rahim.
And of course, those of us who are familiar with etymology and so on, and not only Arabic, but other Semitic languages like Akkadian, and we trace down these roots and everything. But to me, it cries out, it screams,
Yeah.
in the name of Allah, Rahman, Rahim, twice.
Yeah.
So, it's not that Alat disappeared, the
Yes.
goddess.
I'm so
Okay?
glad you came back to Allah. I was going to say,
Yeah.
oh, that sounds familiar.
Okay. Alat uh and became merged in my mind, and it did theologically with Allah. And this was understood by Muslim theologians. So when they studied the most beautiful names of God, the attributes of Allah, they divided them in two categories, right? The names of might and majesty and the names of beauty. All right. So they divided them into the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. All
Mm,
right. And so, Allah is not like this male deity.
yeah.
Allah is not a female deity.
Yeah.
Allah, I mean, even in Arabic now, it's viewed just as gender neutral. It's neither masculine or feminine.
Exactly.
And we're not talking about biological
Right.
gender,
Right.
but what we're saying is that God has half masculine attributes and half feminine attributes, kind of like the yin and the yang type
Yeah.
of thing. It's this balance. And you were talking, you were asking in your questions that you emailed me about like toxic masculinity. I mean, there's that in theology too.
Yeah.
I mean, for the average, Muslim, Allah is masculine and hua, 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 hua.
Right.
And, sometimes when I refer to Allah as she, people start freaking out, even
I know.
women,
I know.
right? Blasphemy.
I
But that
know. Even women. It's sad.
but I show them that, people with an elevated understanding of Islam, theologians and mystics, Rumi pointed out that yes, when you're referring to the sacred feminine, you can refer to God as Hiya. You can use the feminine. You can refer to Allah as she. In terms of his might and majesty, their masculine attributes, you're referring to him. So God, Allah is he, but Allah is also she. And
Yeah.
if people could only understand that, they would have a more nuanced understanding of gender relations and so on.
Yeah.
But people are out of balance. Ijtihad, so important. I mean, you mentioned here the 16th century. Actually, according to most scholars, this happened around the 9th century to the 10th century that they closed the doors of ijtihad. And that
Mm,
was only among the Ahl al-Sunnah. The Shi'i, the Imamis, the Ithna Ashari, they've continued to this day practicing ijtihad. And there are attempts now in the Sunni world to revive it. This is very important, ijtihad. Yes. And in the Quran, over 700, 800 times, it tells you to, will you not think? Will you not reflect? Will you not reason? Will you not reason?
yeah.
Will you not reason? Um, but no, it's just taqlid from the qalada, which means like to put a leash or a collar around a dog. I practice taqlid, so you're a dog on a leash.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think,
Mabruk alayk.
yeah, it has,
Congratulations to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with the religious authority not wanting the lay people to think for themselves. And
Uh,
so they,
Power and control.
totally. Yeah.
Yes, power and control.
Yeah.
Now, adl, this is so important here. Now, I'd like to point out that among the Shia, they include adl in like their branches of faith or their pillars. It's
Mm,
tawheed followed by adl,
mm,
divine unity, divine justice. Okay, so for the Ithna Ashari, they emphasize adl. The Ismailis, they also emphasize it. The Ibadis, or the so-called Khawarij, they
yeah.
they talk about Tawheed, Adl, Qadr, Wilaya, and so on. So they include Adl,
Yeah.
and also the Mu'tazila,
Yeah.
the rationalist
Yeah.
Muslims, or
Yeah.
and they were really Quranist Muslims. They also focused on Adl. And so this stems, why do they insist upon Adl? This stems from a theological dispute with the Sunnis.
Mm,
Now, the Sunnis believed that God was all powerful. And since God is all powerful, he can do anything he wants. And so when the question was asked, can God put a good person in hell and a bad person in heaven? The Sunni theologians said yes, because he's all powerful, he can do anything he wants. But the Mu'tazila and the Shia said no, God is just. He cannot put an evil person into heaven, a disbeliever, and take a pious believer and put him into hell. So this was a big theological difference between them. So I'm glad that you're reviving this importance of adl, or justice, because there are consequences to those beliefs. You can just scan the internet and you'll
Oh, yeah.
find Western scholars of Islam and ulama arguing for fideism. Fideism is the belief that we can only, that moral values, right and wrong, can only be known through God, through revelation and through prophets. Okay. And that nothing is inherently good or inherently bad. It's whatever God decides. So if God decides murder is good, then it's good because God decided it. Do you understand?
Yeah,
So
but
that,
at this
yes,
moment, it's the human beings who are pretending to be God, right?
yes. No, absolutely. 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 So yeah. Um, Adil. And then so yeah, that the whole thing about fideism. And then on the other side are
Oh
people
yeah, can you say explain
yeah,
fideism a little bit? I don't know if that.
fideism, it comes from faith, that our knowledge of right or wrong is based on faith. That's it. It's what we receive from God
I
through
see.
revelation. Then there are people on the other side who believe in moral absolutes,
Mm,
that there are things that are right and that they are wrong, and they apply in all times and places. I mean, the fundamentals and so on are universally shared, and that we can know this from reason, and we can know it from our fitra, or our natural predisposition, our conscience. Okay. So even in the absence of like a direct access to a revelation, that people know that killing is wrong, right? And stealing is wrong. But so there's a theological thing going on there. Yes, fairness. So yeah, I mean, it shouldn't just be about dogma, doctrine, laws. How about you teach Muslim kids values,
yeah,
principles, ethics, okay? Fairness. Beautiful.
that's what
Uh,
I want to say to you that I actually co-designed an inclusive Islam curriculum rooted in human rights for children, and I did
oh,
that
beautiful,
with a friend of mine
beautiful.
who is a mental health expert, and it's really child-centric.
Right. Yeah. And I know you can't include everything here, but you've got all of this stuff. Of course, you've got adl, akhlaq is ethics, maqasid, of course,
Yeah.
the higher objectives. Okay.
Mm.
So, what is the higher objective here? Tawheed is another important principle. People don't understand that. They think Tawheed is just like divine unity. Um, it's, it's far broader than that. The Tawheed means it's not like just unity. It actually means to make one, to
Mhm.
unite.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's to make God one, but it also has social applications as well, to unite, to bring together. And so Tawheed has theological manifestations, but it also has social manifestations, political manifestations, economic
Yeah.
manifestations. So Tawheed is something that should permeate everything,
Yeah.
in Islamic society. Maslaha, you've got that, or the greater good. Another principle is urf, which is common practice. So when Muslims went into, they conquered like Al-Andalus or the Maghrib, they came across people who had pre-existing legal systems. And the position of the fuqaha or the jurist was that if there is a legal system in place and it is functioning and it is acceptable to the people, then it is acceptable to us. So they just said, okay, we accept this, you know. So yes, uh, so this whole idea of, well, this is a Western idea.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no basis to that. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it compatible with our beliefs? Our fuqaha, our jurists, they were more than willing to accept different laws from
Yeah.
different cultures and so on.
Yeah.
And they were also open to changing those laws. It's not necessary to have corporal punishment. They could be replaced with imprisonment, with fines, and other things. And they saw some of these things as deterrents. And so they were flexible in that regard, and it's important. What else? Zaman wa makan is another fiqh principle, which means time and place.
Mm.
That different rules apply to different times and places and different situations. All right. And so, in a nomadic society where there are no prisons, no courts of law, justice has to be swift, justice has to be severe. Sure, I could understand that. But in an advanced civilization, in a city, in a different society, then rules, obviously, they're going to be different. Okay.
Right.
We're not going to be using these type of punishments. There's another principle in jurisprudence, which is la haraj, avoiding difficulty,
Right.
right? And the Prophet emphasized this. He would send his companions out to be governors and everything, and he would say, make things easy for the people.
Yeah.
Do not make people hate Islam.
Right.
All right? Make things easy for the people.
Which is not what
Now,
our Muslim people are doing right now.
no, I mean, my son was saying, I don't know, man. I listen to these podcasts and these khutbas and stuff, and it's, if you don't go to Juma, you're kafir. If you
Yeah.
don't have a beard, you're kafir. If you
Yeah.
don't do this, you're
Yeah.
kafir. I would never send any of my children to any mosque I know. We're very unmosqued, as millions of Muslims are. Even in the Muslim world,
Yeah.
they're hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
I have world leaders reaching out to me saying, our mosques are empty. We're closing thousands of mosques. People are going, yeah, can you blame them?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I went to Eid prayers here years ago, and it's Eid. It's supposed to be,
Yeah.
a fun time. And he was from Al Azhar, and they're supposed to be like among the like liberal, open-minded, progressive even scholars compared to like the Saudis and the Salafis and the Wahhabis and so on. But he spent the whole Eid khutbah lambasting women, saying that it was haram for them to wear pants.
I
Pants.
see.
Okay. And that if you
Um,
wear pants, then your prayers are not accepted and none of your good deeds are accepted. Who are you? Allah?
oh
Are you
my
God Almighty? Who are you
gosh.
to judge these women? You know? And so it was just, I mean, just bashing women. I said, no, I refuse to expose my children to such misogyny. I don't
Yeah.
want my daughter to get all kinds of, all of these ideas in her head. She's going to hate this religion. She's going to flee from it. And I wouldn't blame her.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not. Anyhow. So yeah, there's another principle in fiqh called la darar, which is avoiding harm.
Mhm.
So these are all principles that we need to revive, and this is what you're doing here. I love it. And then you have this lesson on human rights in Islam. Okay. It's just we're not starting from really a human rights perspective. We're going from an Islamic ethical and Quranic perspective. And also it's beyond that. It's like perennial. These are universal values that are shared by people of different faiths and so on. And so you had the Constitution of Medina. The Prophet brought Jews together, Christians together, pagans together, and they agreed we are going to live according to these standards. So those were the standards. That was the covenant of the time. And then we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's nothing there that's incompatible with Islam. So those are the standards that we try to uphold on a worldwide scale. All right. And then in different nations, we have charters of rights and freedom, bills of rights, and so on. So these are the covenants of the prophet for our time. And yeah, so this is great. Lesson 4, love that. Um, Now this, okay, tribalism, yeah, there was that. Small aristocracy for sure. Infanticide. This, no. Um, Not even from a Quranic point of view. The Quran, in this regard, appears to have been misinterpreted and mistranslated. And there's some interesting articles about this that I've studied. Yes, it condemns infanticide, but this idea that little girls were being buried alive, maybe it was a memory of the distant past when and it was never, the pagans never just dug a hole in the sand and buried a baby girl alive. What they would do is they would take a baby and put it in a pot and cover it in sand, and they would take this to the temple of the goddess or whatever as an offering. But this is something that took place maybe 1,000 years before Islam. This is something that was practiced, in the Mediterranean and other cultures. But this is disputed whether the Quran speaks about the infanticide of baby girls, and there is no evidence to support that the ritual killing of children for religious reasons or socioeconomic reasons was prevalent or common at the time of the Prophet. So this is something that seems to be the attempt of. Okay, so let me go with Christianity. If you read, like, from the Christian point of view, the pagans were horrible people. They were evil. They were demonic. They were satanic and all of this stuff. That is simply not true. The bad pagans, they were so wicked. No, they really exaggerated that. And any free-thinking woman, any woman who practiced, herbalism, yeah, all of these people were condemned as witches and
Right.
instruments of Satan. Any remnants of, what was paganism? They wanted to be at one with nature. It's not true that they were horrible people killing children, worshiping the devil. They didn't even believe in the devil. How
Right.
can you say, right? But again, and our very idea, the Christian notion of the devil, um, is based on the god Pan, who was a goat, right? And so they demonized, right? They wanted to make Pan, who was popularly worshipped, into this evil creature and so on. So what the Christians did to the pagans was like a rewriting of history. The
Mm,
Muslims did the same thing with their history.
mm,
It was like out with the old, in with the new. We were all ignorant, horrible pagans before, and now Islam has come. Like they wanted to like start history with them. But this is not historically accurate. What else? Slavery was common and socially acceptable. That isn't correct. It was very uncommon. And let me see. There was a study completed by Dr. Majid Robinson, and he studied the ancestry and genealogy of the tribe of Quraysh. And he found that there was a massive increase in the number of children born to concubines with the emergence of Islam. So, there were slaves were few and far between. Concubines were few and far between. Um, yeah, that coincides with the conquests of North Africa,
I'm
where
not
they.
seeing the document. I'm
Oh,
seeing
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
a
So,
squirrel.
yeah. So let's go back. Let's stop sharing. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't need that anymore. Where do I click now to stop sharing?
The bottom of the Zoom.
Let me see. Hold on. Stop share.
Yeah,
Okay,
there
there
we
we
go.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyhow, yeah, that
We
right.
have
So
there's a
so
whole
yeah.
mindset that needs to
Oh, yes.
completely shift. And the thing about it, when we're talking about Sharia law and how most people believe, the problem, the statistics shows that most Muslims believe that Sharia law is actually God's law, which is such a misinformed, and
Yes.
it's just remarkable how the general Muslim population at large, like overwhelmingly believe that. And that's because our scholars have done a poor job of really educating the public of what is Sharia and what is Sharia law. And they often conflate the two words as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyhow, that's all I have to say about that document, that unit. I can't, I'm not going to keep going, but I think it's fantastic, and
Mhm.
it leads to intelligent and productive discussions like the ones we're having today.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just like
Well,
it's a call, we're calling people to think and to reason and to reflect and to ponder upon these things.
you have no idea how many times that I've done talks, especially in the Northern Europe, Europeans, because they tend to be very secular and atheists.
Mhm.
And says, Ani, you seem like a really rational person. Why are you still Muslim, right? I get that all the time. I was like, well, or why are you still Muslim and so progressive? I was like, well, I am progressive because I'm Muslim. I'm rational because of Islam, because it's just, yeah. I mean, I think because the way Islam has been interpreted and practiced, and the narrative of Islam that's dominated the dogmatic Sunni, has really done a lot of harm to the true teachings of the Quran, which was really, yeah, which was,
Yes, and it's those narrow-minded people would really be out of place during most periods of Islamic society and civilization. I
yeah,
mean, my Islam is not of the religious lunatics and the religiously retarded. My Islam is the Islam of the poets and the musicians and the
yeah.
philosophers and the intellectuals and the authors and the mystics. I mean, oh, they have done such a disservice and a disgrace to Islam.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why
and
they've
so,
outlawed and they've demonized the arts, the music, and and that is one way of them, I think. Well, my take on that is that, we are creative, we have the creative spirit of the creator.
mhm. Yes,
That's
yes, yes.
blown into the womb, as at a certain point when we were a fetus,
Right.
and so regardless whether you are faith or non-faith or whatever faith, whatever
Mhm.
gender, we all have that creative spirit in us, and we are creative human beings, and that's what differentiates us from all other animals. And it is this disconnect that has been enforced, particularly by Sunni Islam, of demonizing the arts, music. That is a way of really disconnecting us from the God in us, that creative soul in us, right?
Right.
And so I started out as a songwriter producer, and so we are basically going back into the arts. And over the years, I've developed a catalog of music, Islamic songs, is
Yeah.
what I call Islamic hymns, as a way to create that positive emotional memory of Islam through the arts and through music in particular.
Yes. Now, when I came into Islam, I was 16 years old, and I realized that, well, we had nothing. I mean, there were no like Islamic songs. I mean, now there are like Islamic songs for kids and Islamic cartoons.
Yeah,
There was none of that back then.
yeah.
And so, I produced an album, of Islamic songs for children called Flowers of Faith. And I got a young sister to sing the songs and everything. And again, people told me, well, musical instruments are haram, so I just used the drum. Um, but they were really infuriated that it was a girl who was singing. But I told her she's not even baligha. She's not a woman, she's a little girl. And they had issues with a little girl singing. No, no, this is not acceptable.
It's so
You know, I,
strange.
I I actually received death threats for making Islamic music. Just beautiful little songs about Bilal and stuff. Music is haram. They didn't even care, if I got rid of the drums. Just the fact that they were songs.
Yeah.
Songs are haram. Music is haram. And wow,
Wow.
really,
I know.
really,
Well, we should definitely exchange our music because I have quite a body of work on that. So,
yeah,
yeah.
mhm,
But
yeah.
well, we've
Oh, yeah. Just, well, I mean, another thing I'd like to point out is for many Muslims who are maybe 45, 50 years or older, and our parents and grandparents and so on, the Islam that has been preached and that has been disseminated, especially since 1979, is
yeah.
unrecognizable to them. Our elders go into mosques and, I talk to them, they say,
I'm in
I
that group, by the way. I'm
I
in that
do
age group, by the
not
way. So it's
recognize
unrecognizable. Yeah.
this Islam at all. They
Yep.
feel totally alienated. And some have even started to question, did we really have Islam at all? right? And I would caution those people, yes, you had Islam, and it was a traditional, moral, ethical, spiritual Islam that was transmitted to you by your forefathers. It's not that, oh, we didn't know the Sunnah. Yeah, you knew the Sunnah. Okay, don't
Yeah,
give me this. But
yeah,
with the rise of Salafism, Wahhabism being disseminated out of Saudi Arabia, and radical political Shiism coming out of Iran, uh, unrecognizable. If you went to a mosque in 1960 anywhere in the United States, it was completely different than today. And we have pictures to document it. Women weren't required to wear hijab. They'd pray without scarves. They'd pray with hats on. Their shirts would go to the elbow or to the knee. It wasn't an issue. It
mm,
was only starting in the late 70s, early 80s that they said, no, you need to cover up. You have to dress this way. By the way, you can't be, they used to pray together, eat together. They say now you have to be in another room. You need to be in the basement. You need to be in an attic. And that wasn't good enough. We don't want you here in the mosque at all. Out. Men only. This is not the Islam of, my wife's, of my mother-in-law and my father-in-law in Morocco. This is a completely, it's, um, I don't know, how would I describe it? Yeah, it's like a spiritually modified Islam. Yeah, genetically modified Islam. I
not
think
only.
it's a spiritually transmitted disease. Yeah.
But the problem too is like you have mosques where it's not only the segregation within the mosque, but you even have to enter through different, entrances, which is utterly ridiculous. But anyway, John, it was thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've really taken the time to read the unit and to go through it with us and to give your 2 cents and your wisdom and your knowledge. It was very, very rich. And I look forward to have another conversation with you with some of the other units that we have.
Sure. I would
And
love to do so.
yeah, yeah, we'll share your content on the website and also on the YouTube channel for everyone, so that there'll be resources for you, so you can read further into the conversations that we have and the references that Dr. John Morrow was sharing, so that we can learn together and really delve deep into the true teachings and the ethical teachings of Islam. So thank you again, Dr. John Morrow, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned for other episodes. Assalamu alaikum, peace,
Alaikum
greetings.
salam. Thank you and God bless. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.